And we're live. Hey guys, welcome back to yet another cracking installment of the Matt Brown Show. Today we are launching our international play for the show. It is our 5th year, so it's about fucking time. And with me today, I have very privileged and honored, I should say, is Kirsten Karchmer. She is the author of Seeing Red, and she's on the line with us today from Austin, Texas. Amazing. Welcome to the show, Kirsten.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Excited to be here. Can't wait to have an amazing conversation.
I know, right? I know. And it's great because now I actually know someone in Austin, which is fantastic.
Right. Absolutely.
So why don't you give us the headline? Put your story on a billboard for me. Mm-hmm. Who are you? What you're about? Set us off.
Yeah. So I kind of have an unusual background. I was a reproductive acupuncturist for about 20 years. I helped over 10,000 infertile women have babies. And I was really interested in developing a new kind of integrative medicine. So currently, if you think about medicine, people either go to their doctor, and then when that doesn't work anymore, they find some alternative practitioner, or they go to an alternative practitioner until that doesn't work, or they get a compound fracture, a cancer, and then they go to a doctor. And I was really interested in trying to figure out what is real integrative medicine, which meant to me, where do we borrow? Like, what happens if we borrow the best from Western medicine, the best from Chinese medicine, the best from nutrition, mind, body, ultimately from technology and placebo? For me is super interesting. And where is the intersection of those things? And how do we leverage that to democratize access to health?
Where did the spark come from? I mean, did you just wake up one day and go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to help 10,000 women have babies. Like where does that spark come from?
Dude, that's exactly what happened. It was just like I woke up and I'm like, I got to solve this fertility issue. Quit my job. No, I was a linguistics professor at the time, and when I was young, I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I couldn't walk. I was really, really sick, and I ended up going to see this acupuncturist completely against my will. Some people forced me to go in. And I said to them at the time, I said, that's like fucking going to a psychic. That's not going to do anything. I've already had surgery. I've seen the best doctors in the world. That's not going to do anything. And I go in and I hid my cane. I hid my chart. And this Chinese man comes in who's like 5 feet tall, who ultimately became one of my professors. He starts feeling my pulse. And I'm like, 22 years old. I'm scowling and guffawing. And he says, oh, you're so tired. And I was sleeping like all day long at that time. And I said, whatever, everybody's tired. And then he keeps feeling my pulse quiet. And I'm just like tapping my finger like, come on, let's get on with this dog and pony. He says, oh, you cannot digest food.
What?
And I said, oh, actually, yeah, I really have some bad problems with my digestion. So then a few more seconds, he says, do you have muscle weakness? And I said, actually, I have multiple sclerosis. And he starts clapping. And he says, oh, that makes perfect sense. I was like, what the fuck? How did you feel my pulse for 30 seconds? I've seen every doctor in the world. How did you get that? And he said, look, we've been feeling pulses for 5,000 years. If you played guitar for 5,000 years, at some point you would be able to tell very subtle changes in the strings, the tension, the width, the surface area. He's like, we can tell things from the radial pulse because we've been practicing for 5,000 years. And when I feel your pulse, I can feel that the pulse where we feel to see like how strong is your digestion. There's nothing there.
What?
And because of that, what happens is he's like, if you can't turn food into energy, then you can't nourish the neurologic and muscular system. Because if you can't, like if you're eating perfect foods every single day, but you can't break it down, turn it into energy, turn it into blood, the neurologic system and the nervous system cannot function. And he's like, when you were born, you had multiple sclerosis, but your body was very robust. And he said, but I was a competitive gymnast and a competitive tennis player. And he's like, but then you worked until you thought you were getting stronger, but actually you're depleting your body because you're overtraining. And at some point around 19 years old, your disease presented itself because finally your disease got stronger than your body.
Wow, that's amazing. What happened after that? I mean, if he was telling you this, what did you immediately do or what changes did you make?
Well, he said to me, he goes, my job is to make your body, or your constitution is the word he uses, to make your constitution stronger than your disease. And then hopefully you'll go into remission. And so essentially people always say, oh, MS, you had MS, now you don't. I'm like, well, I still have MS, but it's not active. So I don't want to ever like tell people like, oh, acupuncture cured my MS. And what I learned was that like we think of, if we go to an acupuncturist, that the needles are the thing. But an acupuncturist, what we can borrow from Chinese medicine is that they look at every single system. So that includes every sign. So maybe mine was like muscle weakness when I was younger. That was my main symptom, and fatigue. But there was 30 other symptoms that I was having, insomnia and digestive problems and dry eyes and et cetera, plus the ecosystem in which I was living, and the amount of work that I was doing, and the amount of stress that I was under, and how I was managing that. So we started looking at all of those things and trying to understand, how are those things related? And what's the most important thing to start attacking first? And so that's what we started doing. And some of the tools you might use are acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine and nutrition and lifestyle modifications and mindset changing. And in the first couple of months, I started noticing that the kind of MS that I have is where you have an episode and then you get better for a little bit and then you have another episode. And I started noticing that the length of the episodes started shortening, and the time between episodes started getting longer, and the severity decreased. And over about a year, I was having only a very occasional episode. And after 3 years, I was having no episodes. And then fast forward like 25 years and almost no episodes.
Amazing. It's kind of like when you're an addict, you go into recovery, but you're still an addict. You know what I mean? It's
Correct.
Just not active. So it's the same idea.
Yeah, you have to still stay out. I mean, I have to really, in the same way, stay meticulous about how I care for my body. And so what happened is I ended up going to acupuncture school because I thought it was the most amazing way of thinking about health. As opposed, like in Western medicine, it's a very myopic approach. Like, oh, you have muscle weakness or you have cognitive problems. Let's make a drug for that. Whereas we don't even have to make a drug or an intervention for the presenting symptom if we treat everything else as a system.
If you were to summarize the systemic issue with health today, what would you say that is?
Well, I think that the systemic issue again, that's still a very allopathic approach. Like, what's the one thing that we need to change that will make people healthier? And the one thing that will help people to be healthier is to stop looking at symptoms in silos and start looking at them as a whole system. So whatever problem a person has, like we built software that was able to improve infertile women's likelihood of conception by 274% in 90 days. These are diagnosed infertile women, right? And our investors were saying, hey, well, so how is this possible? Like, what was the one thing that got them pregnant? And I was like, again, this is very Western perspective. Like, what's the one thing that we can capitalize and disseminate across things? I said, the thing that got them pregnant is the ability of the software to diagnose the whole system and then curate the right solution exactly for that person this month. And then for women, and then once they have a menstrual cycle, review, how did the system change? What's the new path? And how do we create behavioral solutions to change that? And so the thing that we have to do is to start looking at our health as the sum of all of our habits and the way that sits inside of our environment.
Have you read a book called The World's Fittest Book by Ross Edgley?
No. The World's Fittest book?
Yeah, Fittest book.
No, sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's on Audible as well if you're not into reading. I just fall asleep if I start reading. It's a weird thing. I have to actually listen to audio. but
I love an audiobook.
Oh, really? Okay. So look, I mean, the thing that you're touching on, which I've literally heard because I've been training for a really long enduro off-road mountain bike race. And so I've listened to a lot of audiobooks. And one of the things he was saying was that, and he's trained with all the world's best nutritionists and like strongmen and enduro athletes and bodybuilders and one of the things that he describes is a number of different ways that you can get to a result. But he says these are just they're not directives. They're kind of like, approaches that you need to test for you, because I forget what the actual wording that he uses, but the principle is that your body is unique and it will respond differently to different types of routines and regimens and things like that. And that's kind of what, if I'm understanding what your software does, it treats the body holistically, but in a very individualistic fashion. Is that the key?
Yeah, I think so. I think that even in the world of what we would call holistic medicine, we still are cookie cutting interventions for people. And you will certainly, if you work on all the systems, you will see results. But if you're able to look at it as a whole system, and then, like a good example is if you're using the Apple Health Kit, and suddenly, you open it up and you're like, okay, I've got 10,000 steps. I had 4,000 calories today. Part of it was a gallon of ice cream. I slept 6 hours. I had a lot of stress, blah, blah. That information is only information. It actually doesn't drive any novel insights. And it doesn't tell us what's the net improvement or worsening of my health as a result of these data points. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're trying to help to create software to help people to understand.
Okay. What exactly is a biobehavioral intervention?
So a biobehavioral intervention is, I'll give you an example. So say you have a person who has incredibly bad menstrual cramps, and that's their presenting situation. If we look at their habits, we also start to see that they're only sleeping 4 hours a night, that they're mostly eating synthetic food like protein shakes and smoothies and bars and stuff like that. And at the same time, they're incredibly stressed and they don't have any tools for that. While they're having the menstrual cramping, the blood is also very clotty. Sorry, too much information for some people. Mm. So we have to do two things. We have to create something biologic, like a supplement or some intervention to dissolve that stuck and clotty blood. But then also there's behavioral problems that are going on, right? This person, in order for them to get better, they are going to have to, one, learn how to manage their stress better. And then also we have to understand if this person's only sleeping 6 hours, we have to diagnose back. But why are they only sleeping 6 hours? Is it because they can't fall asleep? Is it because they can't stay asleep? Is it because they're so tired they're drinking coffee all day long and then they can't unwind and then they're drinking wine, so they're sort of jacked up on caffeine and alcohol? And then we have to fix that. So a biobehavioral intervention is the intervention that is the intersection of all of those problems, customized to that patient.
There's a lot of stigma, at least, from my understanding, around women's health, and especially when you're talking about something like menstrual cycles, right? It's kind of like, oh, I'm having my period, and that's it's embarrassing. You know what I mean? How do you tackle something like that, and how important is tackling these stigmas related to women's health in the context of what you're trying to achieve?
Well, the data are really interesting about that, because last year in the U.S., 80 million women, that's about 82% of all women of menstrual age, reported life-interrupting menstrual pain and cramps to their physicians. Life-interrupting. So not like, I kind of have a headache today, I'm going to take a Tylenol. This is life-interrupting pain. And yet no one is talking about it. And in fact, often physicians are telling women that that's normal. And women tell me that's our lot in life, is to suffer because of our periods. And so because of that, nearly every woman is suffering in some way or the other from her period. But because of the shame and stigma that's associated with it, no one's talking about it. Nobody's researching it. Like one of the forms of PMS, which is a very severe kind of, it's actually a psychological problem called PMDD. 20% of them will try and kill themselves over it, because they have such emotional disturbance relative to their period. And so, tackling it is really hard. For Brazen, my company, one of the struggles is that when we talk to women about, you don't have to suffer during your period, women say, but that's not true. Like, everybody has menstrual pain. It's common, it's normal. And trying to, break down the difference between what's common and what's normal. So women will say, no, it's totally normal for us to have menstrual pain. I was like, look, 80 million women have significant menstrual pain. That makes it common. That doesn't make it normal. Like, many, many millions of women have been sexually harassed, but we would never say that was normal. No. 40 million women in the U.S., 40 million people have diabetes, but we would never say oh, that's normal. Fuck them. Like, let them die.
Yeah.
Right? We'd say,
Yeah.
no, there's a disease here and we need to help people. And so the way we're tackling it mostly is with trying with humor. Because a serious approach, we sort of started talking about it with this under this like sort of, hey, did you know you've been lied to by history, by every single person that you've probably ever encountered around menstrual pain? And women didn't respond to that positively at all.
Yeah.
They basically told us to fuck off and we didn't know what we were talking about.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy. So, what perception are you trying to change? I mean, if I've got a reasonably large audience, I would suggest, or I don't know, are you guys listening? Send me a mail, hello@mattbrownshow.com. But on a serious note, how do you shift perceptions around all of this, women's health in general? I know, a lot of people, women, I should say, I know a few of my friends are not able to have babies and or having babies quite late, and along with that comes a lot of complications. And so in this whole space, there's a lot of perceptions, just like stigmas that exist. What perception are you trying to fundamentally shift about women's health?
The main thing that I'm trying to shift is that women have been told since the beginning of time that their menstrual cycle is a curse to be endured. And what I want to help women to understand is that it's actually our instrument of unfair advantage. And what I mean by that is that every single month, every single piece of a woman's menstrual cycle, from the length of her cycle, from what happens at ovulation, to the types and intensity of the PMS that she might experience, to the color of blood, the volume of blood, the amount of pain she experiences, where the pain is, all gives us robust diagnostic information about her overall health. And so, like you were saying before, with the precision, there's a certain intervention that's right for each person. Say you want to be a vegan and you try being a vegan. If you pay attention to your menstrual cycle over 3 to 6 months, your menstrual cycle will tell you whether it likes it or not. At first, if you go on any new diet, your body is going to respond favorably because typically you're probably drinking less caffeine, eating less shit. But over 3 to 6 months, your menstrual cycle will either move towards getting better or move towards getting worse. And so, if you want to do keto, the same thing. Like, some people do very well on keto, some people do very poorly on keto, but our menstrual cycle will tell us exactly if we're moving in the right or wrong direction. And men don't have that. And so we can't change the stigma around menstruation if we don't do two things. If we don't help women to understand that they actually don't have to suffer, and then give them the tools and resources so that they don't have to suffer. And then 2, we have to break down the history. I mean, I think the history of the menstrual cycle, it's almost Women's History Month. So yesterday I was talking to 200 middle school girls about the history of the menstrual cycle and how it's holding us back. But it's actually pretty fucking interesting.
Oh, fuck me. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. Oh my God.
It was actually so cool because it was at a really low income school. But it's in a leadership program. So it's all these like middle school girls from a really low income area who are working to be leaders. And I came in, I was like, look, I'm a period expert. There's probably nobody on the planet who knows more about periods than me. We're going to talk about menstrual blood, about clotting, about cramping. And they were like holding their ears. I was like, we're going to talk about cervical discharge, everything. And they're just like, stop talking. At the end, I had them and they were asking so many questions, and it was amazing. So can I share with you the history of the menstrual cycle?
Please do. You have to know.
It was pretty cool. So I wanted to know how so many women could be suffering from their periods and just how there's complete silence about it. And being that I was a cultural linguist in my first career, I thought, well, I'm going to go back and read everything that was ever written since the beginning of written language. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing that I found was in the first 1,500 years, there was nothing written. Radio silence about periods in general. Wow. Not a thing. And then the first thing that I found was in the Bible, in the book of Leviticus, in which it said, depending on which version you're reading, you'll see something different, but it said something to the effect of, that thing is so vile, it's as vile as a menstruating woman or the devil.
What?
That's the first thing that was ever written about women and menstruation. I was like, wow, that's heavy. Then in the 3rd century, Aristotle, greatest thinker of all time, said, women are the inferior species because they menstruate. They are feeble. And that was the prevailing medical theory about women's health from the 3rd until the 17th century. So from the church, they told us we were filthy. And from science told us that we were feeble and inferior. In fact, Aristotle, women only contribute serum, the blood, in which the seed can grow. The seed contains the intellect and the spirit. And that's really like all that matters. And so I realized that we had been conditioned since the beginning of time that we are filthy, inferior, and worthless because we menstruate. And I think that is the reason why the stigma and shame, like if you walk down the aisle in Target, in the tampon aisle, you will see, this is like, everything is like sanitary pads, sanitary supplies, deodorizing, douches. They used to douche, women used to, in the 50s, used to douche with Lysol.
What's Lysol? Do you know what it is? What's Lysol?
It's like this very toxic cleaning product.
Oh my God. Hectic.
Yeah, ridiculous. Because so there's this whole sanitization thing. And so I think that until we help women understand, like in the 3rd, 4th, 5th century, it was fantastic. Menstrual blood was the most feared thing on the planet, practically. It could melt your penis. If it got in your eyes, it would blind you. It could turn wine to vinegar. It could poison crops. It could kill crops. It could cause gonorrhea. I mean, just like so many things. And I think that women had this moment in which we could have had total universal world domination if one woman would have just like stuck her hand in her pants when she was on her periods and stuck her, like some guy's messing with her and she's like, fuck you, I'm going to stick this in your eyes if you're not careful. You better back the fuck off and go like cook some food. Like we could have owned it all.
Oh my God, it's fucking priceless.
Instead, man, they threw sand in our eyes, man.
Yeah, man. Q's taking her headphones off. She's like, I'm done.
What's that?
Q, yeah. Have you met Q? Q, come say hello so she can see what's going on here. Yeah, this is Q.
Hey, how are you?
Awesome. How are you?
I actually Googled while you were chatting here, history of the menstrual cycle. I got some fun facts for our listeners. Maybe you know some, maybe you don't.
I love that you're multitasking during this interview.
I know we need to be. I'm screen capturing this as well, so we'll put it in the video. But ancient Romans thought menstruating women were basically dark witches. That's one.
That's what's so funny is like you can either take that as like they saw them as fucking scary and powerful, or bad.
I know, right? Then medieval Europeans burnt toads to ease heavy flow. That's smart. And then
they inserted it vaginally.
Really? Oh my God. So you knew about that? Probably. Yeah, well, you would. The French thought period sex would lead to monsters being born. Anyway, oh, holy shit. Medieval Europeans thought period blood cured leprosy. Fuck. That's crazy, man. But I mean, like, this is fascinating for me because this is the stuff that passes through generation after generation after generation. And I love that you're engaging with students, the young, hungry minds for someone who's an expert and objective and can tell them how it actually is, right?
Yes.
Not the and to remove, as we discussed earlier, the stigma and the perceptions around all of this stuff. I do a lot of talking to schools in the same way. I talk to them about how to achieve stuff and entrepreneurship and all this kind of malarkey.
Yes.
And you're doing the same thing, obviously, in your field of expertise, right? How do you find the how on a scale of 1 to 10, how fulfilling is that for you?
Oh my God! I mean, I can't imagine doing anything else. I mean, the conversations we were having because. At first the girls were like, this is gross. We can't talk about this. And I was like, let me put you into reality. First of all, I said, because of your period, you can make a fucking human. Not everybody can make a human. You can make a human. Like, that's so amazing. When my 14-year-old got her period last year and she came in and she said, I was like, how was school? And she says, I went to science. I went to math, whatever. Then my period came and I was like, oh my God, I'm so happy. I was hugging her and kissing her. And she's like, Mama, I knew you were going to make such a big deal out of this. And I said, I am, because you can make humans now. That's how amazing your body is. You can make a human. This is a day to celebrate. Like, let's go out to dinner. Best dinner you want in the whole city. Let's go. And, when we start changing the conversation that we have with girls right at the beginning around, this is a source of power. This is a source that you have the capacity to do something that other people, men on the planet, don't have to do.
Have you watched that series on Netflix called Game Changers?
No, I haven't.
Haven't you? Oh my word! Please watch that. It's basically all about. It was a huge stink when it came, like massive. I watched it, and I've eaten meat my entire life, and it made a bloody good case for eating a different animal protein diet, and so focusing on plant proteins and things like that. And the reason why I'm going there, just a slight detour, is to pick up on something you mentioned earlier about the effect of diet on the holistic system of the body, and ultimately, in your case, the ability of it to reproduce or not. What have you learned? This is a complete health related question, but what have you learned? You've done this in 10,000 women. It's like 10,000 hours. So you're the definitive experts in this space. What have you learned about the effect of diet on the body's ecosystem? And what are your views on, plant proteins versus animal proteins, or a blend of both? You mentioned keto earlier as well.
So I think that, it's less about like the exact diet. What I know, and I know that like women who are on a vegan diet will tend to have much less menstrual blood than a woman who's eating animal products in their diet, whether that's meat or eggs or fish or whatever that looks like. We know that in order to make blood, you need vitamin B12. And so I always am averse to using supplements when I can get something from food. And in our clinical work, what we found is that women were most likely to get pregnant if they had 4 days of bleeding, soaking a tampon or a pad every 4 hours. But in women who are eating a vegan or even heavy vegetarian diet, they will tend to have 1 or 2 days of bleeding, which means that their lining is thinner than what is optimal. It doesn't mean they can't get pregnant, but their lining is certainly thinner than what we'll see for women who have who are eating animal-based diets who have closer to 4 days of bleeding. That said, that most women are not eating enough plants. So I try to recommend that what I found most useful for people is about 80-20. So about 20% of your diet, meaning containing whatever animal products work for you. And then about 80% of that, the rest of it being mostly plant-based, with only a small amount of it being from grains. I know there's a lot of controversy about grains, not grains. I find that myself, and when I was still a clinician, that people did better with a tiny bit of either brown rice or quinoa.
So one of the it was interesting that you mentioned that sort of finding around, women bleed less when they're on a vegetarian diet. One of the things they did in this documentary, Game Changers, they took 3 young men who played football, right? So not like soccer, but American football. Okay. So they basically, happened over 2 days. So they had to stay over at this clinic, and they basically strapped a thing onto their like penises, right? So when they fall asleep, men oftentimes get erections. And the first night they gave them an animal protein, like nacho or whatever, right? And they charred that, and then they measured the volume of blood, the thickness of the penis, and the overall length. And then the next night they gave them a vegetarian nacho, right? And they slept again, same thing. And the next day they revealed the results to these kids. I call them kids because I'm old. but they revealed these results. Like the blood flow was up to 400% higher in the penis from having a vegetarian diet. And it was longer, it was thicker, and so they were all laughing. They were like, shit, if we're going to go on a date, we're going to go to a vegetarian restaurant.
Oh my gosh, that's super interesting.
It is, right? Yeah, go ahead.
And so I have heard about this. So it is on my queue to watch this, because I do think it's really interesting. And I think that that's one of the biggest problems, is that often people become very dogmatic about their points of view around nutrition, and then they become very closed-minded to new data that may be conflicting with what they have. And so I think that like hearing that would warrant, like Brazen's technology is going to launch this year. So we'll be able to start really collecting massive amounts of data on what women are eating and not eating, and how that's impacting the volume of menstrual blood that they're able to produce. And I would want to know, so does the vegetarian diet increase like blood perfusion, meaning blood flow to the extremities? But what about like if we measured the volume of blood, like the mean corpuscular volume, which means like if we take a sample of your blood, we're not necessarily checking for anemia, like is there iron in the red blood cell, but what's the density of red blood cell per sample, per unit? And so what would be interesting is over 3 months to then look at the mean corpuscular volume on those individuals. I know that the football players had extremely higher performance on a vegetarian diet versus a meat-based diet. But were they vegans or were they just vegetarians?
Vegetarians.
Eating any animal products whatsoever?
No, it was what?
Like
what
eggs
was it?
or...
Hey, just hold on. Plant-based, yeah. Plant-based only. I think it was vegetarian, yeah. Was vegetarian. Or was it vegan? I don't know. Anyway, go and watch the series. We're providing a very bad service here.
Did you change your diet as a result of that?
I suggested that to my wife and then I got shut down. So it's just you ain't changing my diet.
Hey? You should tell her baby, do you want a huge dick or do you want a medium dick?
I tried. She didn't see that part. She stopped watching it. So I was riveted. I was like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. It had Arnold Schwarzenegger on there as well. And he was I ate bazillion, kilograms of protein in a year sort of thing. And how he wishes it was different and he didn't know any better and blah, blah, blah. And the link, by the way, to performance, true performance. I had breakfast this morning with the guys from Topco Media and the CEO, and they've run Africa Tech Week, and last year we won Africa's Best Tech Startup. Anyway, so yeah, you can clap that up. Anyway, so he's a triathlete and he's a vegetarian, so he only eats some fish sometimes, but otherwise it's a plant-based protein diet, and he's won the South African Championships 4 times. He went overseas to compete internationally and he came 3rd or something like that, so there's certainly a link to performance. I don't know, I'm no expert on that, but we just don't know what we don't know. And I guess that the thing is to try it out for you and see where you net out.
Well, now you've inspired me. I'm going to go and add another question into the onboarding for the Brazen app on is your diet predominantly vegan, vegetarian, or animal based?
Yeah, I think
because then we can track over, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of women, and we can cross-reference that and correlate that with the amount of cramping, the amount of clotting, the amount of hemorrhagic bleeding, and the volume of blood that they're having. And then I'll report back next year. Great.
Fantastic. We can do a face-to-face then when I'm in Austin.
Yes.
I know, right?
That's going to be so awesome.
I know it is. I want to get into the business in a second, but did you know that in Africa there's a thing called period poverty?
And it's everywhere.
So it's is it everywhere? Is it I suppose. So yeah, I mean the thing here is that 1 in 10 girls, they miss school after they have their period. During the period, yeah, and then because they don't have they don't have the right things, and they get infected and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to put that into perspective, 500 million women every day on the planet don't have menstrual supplies.
That's insane, man.
So menstrual cramping is the number 1 reason that girls miss school. The number 2 reason why girls miss school is because they don't have supplies. So in India, it's a big problem because even if they're using rags or something homemade, they're washing their clothes down in a river in a community place. And it may be same thing in Africa too, that you can't, while you're washing your clothes, take out some bloody socks and be washing those in the river with everybody because it's so stigmatized and shameful. And so the girls just have to stay home while they're menstruating and wait it out. And then they miss more school, and that really interrupts their access to power, right? Because if girls aren't educated, they don't have an opportunity to rise up from their social status.
So, I mean, what is your long-term vision around all of this? And as I said, I'll get into the business end in a second. But assuming you get all this data, you can start to really lead, to change and influence the international viewpoint around this kind of thing. I mean, do you have a goal or an ambition around fixing, this scenario? Like in India, approximately 12% of 350 million menstruating women cannot even afford period products. I mean, do you have a view or an activity that you want to move into these kind of scenarios?
So part of our company, we started a nonprofit called the Menstrual Defense Fund. And 10% of our top line profits go to provide people with periods in need across the planet. And so actually my long-term goal is to have Brazen be such a wildly successful company that 10% of the top line products provides menstrual supplies for every person on the planet.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. We need to get more rental crowd in here. So we used to have the whole office in here. Now we've moved into a bigger office. And so anyway, it doesn't sound as cool. I want to cry. So where exactly is Brazen in its sort of business life cycle? Are you still very much a startup trying to find product market fit, or are you kind of now we got investors? Like, talk us through where you guys are at.
So we're about 6 months old. We're basically a spinoff of my first company called Conceivable, which is very similar approach. But what happened was I ended up writing an article for Goop magazine a couple years ago called "What Your Period Can Tell You About Your Health." This is Gwyneth Paltrow's magazine. It ended up being one of the most performant articles on the magazine all time at the time of publication. And hundreds of women wrote to me and said, "Look, I'm 26. I'm not in a relationship. I don't want a baby. I'm not touching shit called Conceivable, but I heard you know how to fix periods better than anybody else. Can you help me?" And I got that, like, hundreds of those exact same emails. And there's this statement in Chinese medicine that says the good doctor treats the patient, the great doctor treats society, and the master will make herself obsolete. And so that's always a guiding principle for my companies is like, how do we continue to make ourselves obsolete? Like, how do we take what we know and leave it and work ourselves out of jobs? And what I realized is like, oh, well, if we take what we know about how to improve women's health with the goal of improving fertility, and we start meeting the needs of women before they even start their periods and educating them, that what will happen is that by the time the women are trying to get pregnant, we will have already fixed everything. And they actually won't need anything called Conceivable. And so now, so we launched the company, then Brazen. Brazen, first of all, means to overcome something shameful with swagger, like period shame. Because we wanted to give ourselves permission to break everything and do it without any shame, to take every chance, to take every risk possible. And so what we're building is software to start. We'll work with girls like age like 7, 8, 9 before they get their period to start changing the conversation about menstruation. In the US, 30% of girls when they get their period, no one has ever talked to them before. 50% of the girls in the room that I was at yesterday, no one had ever mentioned that they were going to have a period, they told me. 50% of them. I mean, that's roughly from a hand show. So we want to make sure that at least before girls have their period, there's been some meaningful and powerful conversations in which we get to set the tone about how girls relate with their period, and then build software and solutions across their whole reproductive life cycle. So unique to each for their age group. So you have the early teens, you have the late teens who are starting to think about being sexually active. You have the early 20s. Then you have the people who are thinking about getting pregnant, trying to get pregnant, who may be struggling to get pregnant, postpartum, and menopause. And then there's adjacent conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome and endometriosis and PMDD, which we'll be addressing too.
Wow. And let's talk about women in tech for a second. How do you feel about your role in that context? Is there enough women in tech? Do you feel like you're clearly a pioneer in this particular field. You're extending your kind of expertise into this world of technology now, more so than ever, I would imagine. And how do you feel about your role there? Or how do you see yourself do you see yourself as a leader in tech? Should we see more women in tech? What's your views?
I think that it's very interesting being a woman in tech because there's so few of us. There's so very few of us. And so, of course, I think that the more diversity across everything, right? From geography, because I think that even in each culture, people think about their cultural influences what kind of technology and how they build technology. And if all the interesting technology, or what we call interesting, is being built in a few countries, it doesn't produce like the most robust experience and the most robust ability to use technology to help people. And so I don't want to limit it only to more women in tech. I want to see more of everybody in tech, except for just like white dudes in Silicon Valley. Because it's its own kind of myopia, and it's self-limiting. And we can use technology to help end the suffering and support growth and expansion. And in a very powerful way, but we can't do it if there's only a few people who have access to it. And unfortunately for, like in the venture world, like we're a Silicon Valley venture-backed company, which only 2% of women, 2% of all the Silicon Valley money goes to women, 2 or 3% right now.
So you're in the top 2%. You're in the top. You're in the top 2%, basically. Something
like that, or at least I'm just like a good schmoozer. I don't know which one.
I don't know. I'm sold. I'm sold. So tell me, let's talk about your. Let's talk. I think, yeah. Sorry, the line delay. Go ahead. You think? Yep.
I forgot already.
No, dear. We're talking about you being in the top 2% and funding, and I wanted to go down that rabbit hole with you for a moment. So, has it been difficult for you to raise capital as a startup founder in this space?
So, my first company, I raised about $1.5 million in a couple of months. It was very fast from angels in Texas, which was a lot of awkward conversations, a lot of fucking awkward conversations, because I was only pitching men who are mostly cowboys. And, they're like, but how does it work? And so I was really having to do a deep dive on menstrual blood with these cowboys. And there was a lot of squirming. There was a lot of fucking squirming going on. So much so that like I had this one 7:00 meeting with this guy that I knew to be as cowboy as they come. Dude walks in, he's got boots on, he's got a big ass like brassy belt on. And he's about 6'6", and I shake hands and I'm like, well, Kirsten, how you doing? Come on, let's sit down and talk about this new company. I was like, shit, this is not going to go well. So the waitress comes, it's 7 a.m. The waitress comes over and she's like, would y'all like some coffee? And I said, we'd like 4 shots of tequila, please. And the guy's like, Kirsten, it's kind of early to be drinking, don't you think? And I was like, you know what? I'm going to talk about some shit that's going to make you squirm. This is going to make it all go a lot easier. Let's just do some shots. And so we did shots, and the guy invested that day.
Wow. That's crazy. Talk us through, you're obviously based in Austin, a massive technology scene over there. Can you describe for our listeners and viewers, what is the current state in your view around the tech scene in Austin, Texas?
I'm kind of spoiled because I live half time in Austin, half time in Silicon Valley, and the tech scene in Silicon Valley is just 1,000 times bigger than it is here. So I think that especially in MedTech, because of Stanford, and because just the StartX and Plug and Play and all those folks, there's so much going on in tech in Silicon Valley that seems like there's a lot less going on here, although it's growing. I mean, Austin was named the #1 city to have a startup last year, unfortunately, because so many flippin' people are moving here every single day, like these folks from South Africa and, everywhere.
Those damn Saffers, when they get there, it's going to ruin it all.
I know, but I do love them, so you guys are welcome. And so I think it's burgeoning. I think that the startup scene is more robust than specifically like the kind of tech that we're building. That we have Apple, we have Facebook, we have all the big companies here, and some of the smaller ones too. But you don't feel like when you're in Silicon Valley, everywhere you are, you hear people talking about startups. Like you're in a cafe and you hear like 3 people are talking about deals that they're working on. Everywhere you are, people are creating. And I haven't felt that really happen here yet. And it might just be the ecosystems that I'm at.
What's driving this appetite to move to Austin?
Well, I mean, especially if you're in the startup world and you're looking at what it costs to run a company and to live in Silicon Valley, Austin's about 1/3 as expensive. So it's practically free comparatively. It's a super, like we have more capita per books in Austin. So it's a really educated city, more books per capita in any other city in the US. It's relatively temperate except for in September and August when it's blistering hot and you want to just die. And I think that it is a town that's becoming a town of innovation. And it's a really young town also. So I think as people who are looking to build things, and because of it's centrally located in the United States, I think that also makes a difference. So you can be in New York or San Francisco in 3 hours either direction.
What do you do in your 6 months in Silicon Valley exactly?
I meet with investors. I meet with other founders. Some of my team, my co-founder lives in Silicon Valley. My romantic partner lives in Silicon Valley. So he's a startup founder too.
Oh, wow.
His company is actually very interesting.
Really? What is it? Punt.
So they built. So you know how they do artificial intelligence with vision and cameras. So if you're, like you've seen in a building where there's like one security dude who's looking at 8 cameras to make sure nobody comes out of this door or outdoor, they were able to teach algorithms to be able to read video as data.
Whoa.
And so nobody has to do that anymore. And they apply it. They do that in large, like mostly in manufacturing, like in Tesla or Walmart. So any place there's a place where they want to look for inefficiencies, or they want to look to make sure that things are being implemented in the safest way, they're implementing artificial intelligence throughout.
Sure. That's incredible.
It's super interesting.
Yeah, we were in London Tech Week. When was it? June last year. It's incredible how London is positioning itself as being the alternatives to Silicon Valley. It's like they're these.
Oh, really?
Yeah, man, it's nuts. Like we were sucked up into this PR exercise by the UK government. So basically, when the Brexit referendum went the way that it did, they were like, well, okay, well, what are we banking our future GDP growth on when our biggest trading partner, the EU, is going to basically give us the fucking bird? And
right.
And so what they did was, which was quite clever of them, was to mobilize billions of pounds, literally put them into various funds, and reestablish their Department of Trade and Industry networks across emerging markets. So what they've done is they've gone in and literally looked for the best technology-driven companies in the world in emerging markets and in developed markets as well, obviously, to attract them to London. The idea being that you've got, Oxford, all the different universities. You've got an incredible skills like fund that you can essentially, leverage as a startup. You've got economies of scale. You're at the center of the universe. The time difference is great, depending on where you want to move. And it was incredible. When you're at the center of the UK government's PR campaign. Like I was sitting at a palace in Lancaster House, which you don't get into unless you're invited. And I walked in there with my printed T-shirt saying Africa's best tech startup, and there's this military dude standing outside, and he sees me walking up to the gate, and he just takes one look at me, and he's like, I guess you're here for this event. I walked into this palace, and I'm the only one not wearing a suit. And it was like full of diplomats. It was crazy, but it was fantastic because I was the odd person out. But it was just interesting that there's such a move, even to like Kenya and Africa is also growing as a tech hub. Cape Town is another one. Silicon Cap. There's loads. I'm not saying that they're comparable. Like Israel is another one that's the hotbed. But it's interesting to see how things are moving outside of the established like Silicon Valley hub. Like I say, this thing, I love successful founders like you specifically, because I think there's a narrative that the media portrays about Silicon Valley, and that's where you need to go as a founder. And some people do raise money. I see you've been featured on TechCrunch, but there's all these titles, all these releases, blah blah startup raises, $10 million in like seed funding or whatever the case is. And it creates a perception that as a founder, you need to go to Silicon Valley, and that, that's where you're going to go and to win. But for every one of those articles, there's hundreds of thousands of crushed dreams. And it's interesting that we're seeing how that idea is slowly but surely, I mean, it's still very strong, of course, but it's still slowly but surely, in my view, dismantling. And you're finding these other hubs like Austin, growing and being incredibly prosperous for founders.
Well, I think that, I got to hang out with Gary Vaynerchuk a couple months ago, and I love how he talks about incessantly almost around that there's this pursuit of people who are entrepreneurs to sort of build unicorn companies. And what is also an amazing company is you can build a company that makes $400,000 a year that you own 100% of. And I think that mindset is the way to actually help bring people into. I ask myself all the time, like, we're about to start raising our next round of funding, and really honestly ask myself, like, do I really want to raise another round of funding? Do I want to build $1 billion company, or do I want to build a $20 million company? And do I need to raise money to do that? I mean, I want to do some very specific work around placebo that I'm actually going to need a lot of money if I'm going to pull it off. But the idea of, oh, well, what if I stopped fundraising and I just had a company that made, a couple $1 million a year, like, would that be enough?
Would it be enough?
It would not be enough. I don't really care about the money. I'm kind of a minimalist. I love to travel. That's really important to me. But I'm one of these people thinking about how to make things better, and I want to do it quickly. And so, in order to really change the face of medicine, then we have to do something that's much, much bigger, so that we're able to aggregate irrefutable amounts of data to prove what I'm saying.
Yeah, you almost need to raise the capital to prove your case.
Exactly. That's the point. I think that ultimately we can build technology using our diagnostic paradigm that can then deliver a placebo.
Yeah. It's
successfully change outcomes, which then we've made healthcare free on the whole planet.
Wouldn't that be amazing, hey?
Yeah.
That was speaking about this, women in tech role, health tech specifically. Obviously, you've heard the story of Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos, the CEO there, and that whole story. What are your views on that? Because you strike me as being, an expert, quote unquote, and, have the right networks in place. You're able to access funding. You've got the story and the narrative to build $1 billion business if you chose to do that. And you're following in the footsteps. I can only think, and I'm not knowing America at all, as well as you do, of course, but I can only think in the media, to my knowledge, the story about Elizabeth Holmes and how she was accused of fraud, and the whole thing, basically, she ripped off investors. It was a big stink. It was kind of like the health tech version of what's that co-working space story now, WeWork, WeWork, and the IPO scam and all that shit, and how the fuck were they valued at that amount, and da-da-da. So what are your views here, on Elizabeth Holmes, and how are you going to ensure that, you're going to tell a different story at the end?
Well, I think one of the biggest differences, she wasn't an expert. She didn't have 20 years of we already have the data to prove that what we're doing, even in a smaller scale, is highly impactful. For me, I think that if anybody who knows me, I'm a very simple person, actually, even though I like to chat and bullshit a lot. And I really have one guiding principle, and it's around never let anything pass out of your mouth that's not the truth, and make sure that you don't ever do anything that you have to lie about. And so, having an outcome like Elizabeth Holmes, to me, seems like, of all the things that could crash our company, that's probably not one of them, is some kind of fraudulent behavior. The kind of things that crash it is, even with my partner, Rob, we're always talking about fundraising is probably one of the biggest things that can crash your company, because if you don't raise enough money, you can bankrupt the company. And if you raise too much money, you can bankrupt the company, right? Because too much money sets too high of a valuation and too high of expectations that are unachievable. Too little, you run out of cash before you execute on your plan. And so I think that that's actually our biggest liability, is just making sure that we're raising and spending money efficiently to get to our milestones, to continue to validate each step of the way the significant impact that we can make on women, their health, their present, future, and future health.
Okay, so we're going to do a live round of Q&A. So while we've been having our amazing chat, Q-Dog has been reaching out to her female friends in her network and told her that you're on the show. And
cool.
We've got some questions here which are way above my pay grade. I'd like to dive in here and answer them. Are you online there? So Q's just getting ready to jump in. So
hello.
Okay, have you got the questions? Okay, cool. So Q&A for our ladies out there. You're welcome.
Okay, so I'm getting a question here. They're like,
wait, closer to the mic.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you go.
So now I'm getting a question here. The first question is I don't get cramps, but however, I become a farting machine. So I fart a lot. What could be the problem there? What's the reasons for that?
Okay, so that's really good. So, anytime, if you don't have cramps, that's good. That just indicates that your body is able to regulate the movement of blood through your uterine and femoral artery. Lots and lots of women, about 80% of them, will experience like emotional changes, significant emotional changes before their period.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at the physiology. So before your period, one of the jobs of your liver is to break down your hormones and use them and remove them. And when the liver is functioning, like at the end of the menstrual cycle, you have a ton of estrogen and progesterone in your system that the liver needs to metabolize and get rid of. When your liver is working really, really well, it can take all of those hormones, use them, get rid of them, and you shouldn't have any symptoms of PMS whatsoever. And when it can't, it basically gets irritable. Right? Imagine if you're trying to do anything that's really hard. If you're trying to push an elephant up a mountain and it's incredibly hard, you're like, fuck, this is so hard. I hate this. This is so hard. This is hard. This is what happens to women, either emotionally or physically. So either they can have all this tension and constraint that causes breast tenderness or bloating, or it can show up as emotional stuff.
Okay. So now the second question is, when I was on a vegan diet for a week, my cycle was just a drop of blood. So does that mean going on a vegan diet is a no-no for my body?
Can you speak up a little bit? I couldn't hear the question perfectly.
Oh, okay. Sorry. That's
okay.
The second question is, I was on a vegan diet for a week.
Yes.
And my cycle was just a drop of blood. Could that mean that being on a vegan diet is bad for my body?
So, this is part of the conversation that we had earlier. In my clinical experience, that women will have the least amount of blood when they're having a vegan diet. That said, being a vegan for 1 week is probably not enough to change your menstrual cycle that significantly. If it happened like you were on a vegan diet for 2 months and then you went down to 1 drop of bleeding, then I would have suspected it was related to your diet. But just 1 week, it probably just wasn't related.
Okay. And my third question is, my cycle went from 7 days to just 4 days. Should I go see a doctor or?
So I would like to ask a follow-up question, and that is, did anything else change? Did you change your diet? Did you have more stress? Optimally, like what we found in our clinical work, that actually 4 days of bleeding is the perfect amount. Mm-hmm. The other thing is you want to know if there's any clotting in the blood. Anytime there's clotting, there'll be too much bleeding. And then once you get rid of the clotting, you'll see the amount and the days of bleeding really shorten up. So to me, 4 days is perfect. 7 days is too much.
Okay. Our operation manager, she's asking, I want to, like, after being on a pill, I want to go back to having my regular cycle. Yes. What should I do? But then without using a pill. Is there anything that I can do that's going to help me?
Yeah. So the follow-up question is, was she taking birth control to regulate her cycle, meaning to make it come regularly? If so, then there's more information that we need to do. Or if she was taking oral contraceptives just for contraception, then when she stops taking the birth control pill, it should come back and normalize.
Oh, okay.
Cool. And on that bombshell, Kirsten, we need to wrap this up. Last question. Why do you do all of this? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
I get crazy around needless suffering. Like, I can't tolerate knowing that women are suffering, and in my opinion, it's needless suffering. And I'm so fucking curious about what would happen to this planet if we unleashed every single woman from her period.
Awesome.
If all of the time and resources and energy that she used managing, worrying about, being ashamed of, and suffering, she was completely liberated from, what could happen? What could happen for women, and what could happen for our entire society?
Kirsten, where can we find out more about what you're doing? Where can we reach out to you?
Reach out to me on Twitter is the easiest way, at Kirsten Karch, Karch. You can find me on Facebook. My personal one is Kirsten Karchmer Official. You can check out Brazen at Forever Brazen, and all of our social properties are Forever Brazen. We say Forever Brazen because not just right now, but for your whole reproductive life cycle.
Amazing. Kirsten, you're an absolute legend, and thank you so much for being on the show. It's a privilege and an honor, as I said right up front. And it really is. And I look very much forward to meeting you face to face in May when I'm there.
I can't wait. Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a fun conversation, super interesting. And thanks for letting me share about the work we're doing. And definitely reach out. I will show you and take you to all the best places.
Fantastic. Thanks, Orson. Thanks, Kirsten. Round of applause. There we go.